do you know that we do not know? That's in Job 15:7 through 9. Eliphaz's point is that Job cannot lay claim to such heavenly wisdom. Behind his sarcastic challenge, however, rests an understanding that the first man, or Adam, could indeed lay claim to such heavenly wisdom. Several elements in these verses lead to this conclusion. First, in contrast to the Genesis account of the creation, the first man in Job is described in the text as having been born or brought forth rather than created or formed, as you find in Genesis. And there are different verbs used in Genesis than you find in Job. In a recent study of the first man mythology in the book of Job, Dexter Callender observes, "In these words of Eliphaz, we learn that the first human was thought to have been born before the hills." The verbal root here is hawal, which means to dance or writhe, and it is used in connection with birth imagery, denoting writhing in travail, and hence can render the meaning to bear or bring forth. The meaning of the verb is clear in the parallelism here with yalad, as in Isaiah 51:2. In other words, to cite Callender again, the first human is described as having come into existence through natural means, that is, through birth. This usage points to an event, or seems to point to an event, which precedes the formation of man from the dust of the earth in Genesis chapter 2. Second, the first man in Job 15:7 is said to be born before the hills, a term which is also used of the personified figure of wisdom in Proverbs, where wisdom is said to have been possessed by God at the beginning, before the mountains were settled, before the hills was I brought forth. That's in Proverbs 8:25. In the Genesis account of the creation, man's physical body is created on the sixth day. Yet the hills and mountains do not appear until the division of the waters from dry land on the second day of creation. Again, this suggests a prior existence for the first man mentioned in Job, which precedes the creation of his body on earth and its placement in the garden. Third, the question of Eliphaz, "Have you listened in the counsel of God?" is informed by a context which places the first man in God's heavenly counsel, where he has access to heavenly wisdom. According to Eliphaz, the wisdom of the primordial human came as a result of his presence within the counsel of God and the fact that he listened. Callender observes that the use of the verbs in this passage may be alluding to a particular divine counsel in which the plan of creation was revealed, or it may indicate continuing access to the counsel, meaning, art thou wont to be a listener? Fourth, in Job 38 through 41, the Lord lists various things that Job, as a mortal, cannot possibly know, but which God does know by virtue of his wisdom as creator. We're familiar with this verse as Latter-day Saints. "Where wast thou when I laid the foundations of the earth? Declare if thou hast understanding. Who hath laid the measures thereof, if thou knowest? Or who hath stretched the line upon it? Whereupon are the foundations thereof fastened? Or who hath laid the cornerstone thereof? When the morning stars sang together, and all the sons of God shouted for joy." According to Herbert May, the motif of the first man, created before the earth, appears in Job 15:7 through 8, and also is found in Job 38:4-7. In Job chapter 38, the theme of wisdom and knowledge, which Job, in contrast with God, does not have. He was not there, as first man was there, when God laid the foundations of the earth, and members of God's council, the morning stars, the sons of God, rejoiced, end quote. In response to God's question, Job, as an imperfect mortal, would have to admit that he did not know. But the first man, or Adam, could have answered yes, since as one associated with God at the creation, he had access to divine wisdom about the creation of the earth. In fact, as Callender puts it, the primal human was present at the creation, and by virtue of that fact possessed wisdom in its most intimate details. The divine speeches in Job, chapters 38 to 41, make clear that the secrets of the universe lie within the primordium, the epic of creation. As one who was born then, he knew the deepest and most esoteric of knowledge. Thus, in the worldview of the writer of Job and his audience, the first human is an exalted being. He is numbered among the sons of God. Another theme found in ancient literature on Adam is the teaching that God knew beforehand that Adam would fall, and in Christian literature, the idea that knowing beforehand of man's future transgression, God would provide a Savior by which man could be saved. In a Coptic Christian work called the Discourse on the Abaton, at the creation, God sends an angel to retrieve clay from the earth to form man's body. The earth objects, complaining that wickedness will be committed by man if he is created and placed upon the earth. The earth says, "If thou takest me to him, he will mold me into a form, and I shall become a man and a living soul. And very many sins shall come forth from my heart and body, and many fornications, slanderous abuse, jealousy, hatred, and contention shall come forth from his hand, and many murders and shedding of blood shall come forth from his hand. Let me stay here and go back to the ground and be quiet." In spite of the earth's objections, the angel carries some clay to God for the formation of Adam's physical body. After God creates Adam's body, however, there is a discussion in heaven between the Father and the Son about what to do about man. According to this text, he left him lying for 40 days and 40 nights without putting breath into him. And he heaved sighs over him daily, saying, "If I put breath into this man, he must suffer many pains. And I said unto my Father, Put breath into him. I will be an advocate for him. And my Father said unto me, If I put breath into him, my beloved Son, thou wilt be obliged to go down into the world and to suffer many pains for him before thou shalt have redeemed him and made him come back to his primal state. And I said unto my Father, Put breath into him. I will be his advocate, and I will go down into the world and will fulfill thy command." It is clear from this early Christian text that God knows beforehand that man will transgress, and that it is necessary to appoint an advocate for man, and that Jesus, in this tradition, willingly offered to suffer the pains of man's redemption even before man was given life. Recent studies by Michael Stone, William Lipscomb, and Gary Anderson, and others have focused on an interesting set of Armenian Christian Adam and Eve texts. These texts were first published in the Armenian language in 1898 and only published in English in the last several decades. These texts discuss events which took place in the Garden of Eden before the fall. In the text, Adam and Eve in the incarnation, the serpent tells Eve, "God was man like you. When he ate of the fruit of this tree, he became God of all." In another related text, the history of the creation and transgression of Adam, the serpent tells Eve, "God was like you, because he had not eaten of that fruit. When he ate it, he attained the glory of divinity." Speaking of the devil's words to Eve in this passage, Michael Stone, the editor and translator of this recently published text, observes, "The formulation in our text says not just that humans will become like God or gods, but also that God was himself originally human and became divine through eating the fruit." In the transgression of Adam, after Eve partakes of the fruit, Adam asks her, again, these are the Armenian texts I spoke of, Adam says, "Why have you eaten the fruit?" Eve responds by saying, "The fruit is very sweet. Take and you taste and notice the sweetness of this fruit." But Adam refuses, saying, "I cannot taste it." According to this particular account, Eve then begins to cry and beg Adam to eat. "And do not separate me from you," she says. After some deliberation, 3 hours according to one account, Adam reasons, "It is better for me to die than to become separated and detached from this woman." And then he partakes of the fruit as well. These and other extra-canonical texts dealing with Adam and Eve indicate that after the redemption of Christ, that Adam would be taken to paradise, that after his resurrection he would be restored to his former premortal inheritance, where according to these texts he once reigned under God as a king, and at God's specific command was even worshipped by the angels. This suggests a return to a state where he could again receive such adoration, a state clearly suggestive of deification. The theme of deification, in fact, appears explicitly in the Syriac Testament of Adam, where the patriarch explains to his son Seth, shortly before his death, that God would eventually fulfill Adam's desire. Just before being cast out of the garden, the Lord tells Adam,